To our top story now, and the Prime Minister has vowed to take on anyone who stands in the way of his migrant deportation policy after the Supreme Court ruled it unlawful earlier this week. Speaking about the Rwanda plan this morning, Rishi Sunak said his patience has worn thin and that people just want the problem fixed.
But despite the Prime Minister's attempts to placate MPs with the promise of emergency legislation, unrest around the Rwanda plan drags on. Former Home Secretary Isabel Oakeshott attacked Sunak's proposals in a scathing opinion ed this morning, while the House of Lords has warned it will block any attempt to introduce emergency legislation.
Joining us now is TalkTV's international editor, the excellent Isabel Oakeshott. Welcome, Isabel. I mean, what exactly is going on here? I can't get my head around it. The Supreme Court said it's unlawful. Rishi Sunak says, well, I'll pass a law to say Rwanda is safe. I mean, this is Alice in Wonderland territory, isn't it?
I mean, in a sense, it doesn't matter what's going on, the minutiae of the legal machinations. I mean, for those that are interested, what's gone on is in the time that the government was waiting for this inevitable judgment of doom, they have apparently been doing some work with Rwanda to make sure that Rwanda can tick some boxes which says Rwanda is actually a safe place for people to be deported. But none of this is neither here nor there, because this is not going to happen. There are so many reasons why it's not going to happen. The first one is quite simply one of time. Time is running out for this government to make it happen. The maximum they've got before the next election is a little over a year, realistically, probably next October. So very little time. They do not have the will of Parliament and, crucially, the House of Lords. I mean, the House of Lords always blocks things like this. The idea that the House of Lords is going to just nod through so-called emergency legislation to make this happen is absolutely for the birds. And then you've got the whole issue of whether we do or don't leave the European Convention on Human Rights, which David Cameron, now Foreign Secretary, would be very opposed to. So whatever way you look at it, it is just a complete and utter Horlicks. And the government would be an awful lot better coming up with plans they know they can implement without having to run up against what goes on in countries in Africa.
Isabel, it seems that the government essentially had two plans, Rwanda and paying loads of money to the French, both of which are failing. So are we just lacking a government that has creativity and common sense?
Well, of course, yes. I mean, there are countries in Europe that have managed to do the obvious thing, namely turning back the boats. We're not talking radical regimes here. We're not talking nutty fascist places. We're talking Belgium. There they have turned back boats, and guess what? They don't have a problem anymore. So a lot of people in this country will wonder why on earth we don't use the assets and resources we've got, including the Navy, to do just that. Now, if Rishi Sunak were to use the Navy to turn back the boat, something that he can do, not going to say it's easy, but he can do it, I think in a heartbeat, he would win over the huge support of the majority of voters who are so worried about the state of our borders and the huge pressure on taxpayers' money that this influx is bringing.
It's kind of weird because, of course, Rishi's response to the Supreme Court's verdict was, I will not allow a foreign court to block the Rwanda scheme, but the British court just has, so it's kind of weird. But Suella Braverman in The Telegraph today has set out her five-point plan, the most important of which is, in order to stop the boats, in order to stop the migrants coming across the channel, we must leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Rishi shows no sign of doing this, and therefore you have to, as Suella said, you have to question his true commitment to stopping the boats. I thought it was extraordinary, was it 2 days ago, his press conference at number 10 Downing Street, where he stood there, actually had the temerity to stand there with that lectern saying, stop the boats. He has no chance of stopping the boats whatsoever unless we leave the ECHR, and I don't think he's going to do that.
I would be astonished if he went anywhere near to doing that. That said, I've been astonished already this week with the return of David Cameron, a move which makes leaving the European Convention of Human Rights much more difficult because he would not be likely to support such a move. But Rishi Sunak is a globalist. He is not the sort of politician who will want to do that. You know, he will have ringing in his ears that the kind of countries that aren't part of that are Belarus. So he just won't. It doesn't go down well on the dinner party circuit. It doesn't go down well in Silicon Valley. It is not in his makeup. That said, the Conservatives are facing absolute electoral catastrophe. They are going to have to do something, and crucially, not just sound like they are, quote, determined to do something. Yeah. Voters up and down the country are sick fed up of hearing Prime Minister and the Home Secretary saying they are determined to do things. Not interested in your determination. We're interested in seeing actual results.
Isabel, if we did withdraw from the ECHR, which I don't think would be necessarily a good idea for the country in the long term, but isn't that going to affect also the Good Friday Agreement and the fragile peace over there?
Well, that's not something that I am an expert on. I'm sure that it is a source of concern. How do you think it would affect that Good Friday Agreement?
Well, it's part of it. The ECHR is part of it, and if we withdraw, it's going to cause more tension in Northern Ireland, and also talk that Biden and the US would not be happy with that either. So they'd surely be putting pressure on us to stay within it.
So we've got to do it, because if Joe Biden's unhappy, well, you know.
Of course, and as soon as you pray and aid the awful spectacle of things getting worse in Northern Ireland, that is a very powerful argument. We saw a lot of that concern in the run-up to the finalising the Brexit agreement. And, you know, those are real concerns. So, of course, they would have to be addressed. But quite simply, the vast majority of voters aren't interested in the minutiae. They trust our politicians, or at least they did to find ways around those types of concerns in order to deal with the overwhelming problem of the day, which is the huge cost and pressure on systems of the number of people coming over. And we've had boatloads in the last few days alone. So how's that stopping the boats thing playing out? Not too well.
And if Sunak is to have any electoral hopes at all, it will revolve around stopping the boats. He cannot triumphantly say, well, I've stayed in the ECHR to save the Northern Ireland peace agreement. You know, I take your point, JJ, but that is not going to be a vote winner for him. And as you say, Isabel, lest we forget, and still they come. 600 came across the channel on Sunday alone. The Daily Mail today has a picture of one dinghy with 40 poor migrants on board. At 7:30 yesterday morning, there was their dinghy, nice and proud, sailing across the channel. By 9:30, it was nearly sinking. So if the Lords want to stopping the boats, what they're actually doing is enabling migrants to risk their lives. So shame on them. But also, perhaps as a distraction tactic, the government is leaking elements of Jeremy Hunt's autumn statement. Maybe get some of your reaction to that, Isabel. The main tranche of it seems to be that the Tories, in their time-honoured fashion, are going to declare war on welfare scroungers. So if you're out of work, you have to be seen to look for a job. And if you're not seen to look for a job, you will lose your benefits, you'll lose the right to free prescriptions at the NHS, and so on and so forth. JJ pointed out to me that actually it's 6 months you're going to be allowed to actually look for work. 6 months. I mean, why not make it a month? If you can't find a job in a month, we start to curb your benefits. But I mean, is this distraction tactic going to work?
In short, absolutely not. Do they take the electorate for complete and utter morons? You know, this party has been in charge for the last 13 years. They had massively radical and well thought out plans to tackle the welfare state when they were in opposition. Ian Duncan Smith had this all worked out. You know, universal credit was supposed to be the answer. to the completely excessively bloated welfare state. And instead, the precise opposite has happened. We've got more people who are benefit dependent than ever. There are an astonishing number of people of working age who depend on the state for their day-to-day existence, despite the fact that they're perfectly able-bodied. And the Tories' record on this has been utterly abysmal. So please don't patronise voters at this stage and expect it to work by saying that you're going to belatedly crack down on all of this. It makes no sense whatsoever. It won't wash. And if they think that that is going to somehow take the headlines away from their failure on so many fronts for more than a day or two, then I think they are utterly naive.
So, Isabel, Jeremy Hunt obviously is attacking those out of work, essentially threatening them. You're going to get no more money unless you find work. But with so many people inactive now due to mental health, isn't this going to worsen the problem for people?
Worsen the problem for which people?
So the people who are out of work because of mental health issues, anxiety, depression. This isn't going to make him threatening them with, we're going to cut off your money because you are essentially struggling mentally. This isn't going to suddenly fix them and make them get back into the job centre, is it?
I think many voters, I'm sorry, are pretty unsympathetic with the huge rise in the number of people who depend on benefits because of mental health or depression. It's not good for your mental health to be dependent on others for your existence. It's not good for your mental health to be sitting around at home, not having a routine, not having a purpose. And I think that the majority of people with mental health problems would benefit from doing some kind of work that is within their abilities given their condition. So, of course, if you're suffering from deep depression, it is an awful thing. I'm very familiar, having seen it in my own family, with how devastating serious clinical depression is, addiction, and so on. But it is not enough to be suffering from anxiety to say you can't do any job. Many jobs now are workable from home. You don't have to be going outside, engaging with people and so on. You can do it around your good days and your less good days and so on. We cannot allow mental health problems and anxiety to become an excuse for an ever-growing dependency on the welfare state, because it is not good for the individuals concerned, as well as not good for our economy.